So hi, Microbehunter here, and I received another long email with a question on how to buy a microscope, and I really want to share this with you at the same time. Of course, I want to answer some of these questions here, and I like this email a lot because it kind of summarizes quite well the struggles of a beginner who wants to buy a microscope. So maybe you've experienced something similar, and I want to go simply through the email with you, and as I go along I would like to answer some of the points and some of the questions here. I would like to take up microscopy as a hobby, and I wanted to tell you that I really appreciate your YouTube channel. I learned a lot from watching your videos. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much. I hope that it is indeed a help, these YouTube channels, and also the other projects that I have on my website, because I want to share my fascination with microscopy and of the beauty of the microscopic nature with the rest of the world. However, I'm first and foremost a beginner. I remember playing with a microscope when I was a kid, but it was more of a toy than a high-performance device. If you have time, I would like to benefit from your experience and explanations on the subject. By the way, this is also how I started with microscopy. My first microscope was a toy microscope that I got when I was 6 years old for Christmas. Times have changed a lot since then, and nowadays, because the market of microscopes, there are simply so many more companies around, it can be very confusing for a beginner to actually make a decision, and I hope that this video is going to help you a little bit here. I must admit that buying a microscope is the most complicated purchase I've ever had to make. I've been asking around for more than 2 weeks now, but I'm still in the middle of a fog. As this is my first microscope, I have set a budget of 500 to 600 euros maximum for this purchase. I focused on a binocular or trinocular microscope to observe mainly microorganisms. Well, first of all, 500 to 600 euros for an introductory general purpose beginner's microscope. I wouldn't even say beginner's microscope anymore. Amateur microscope, this is going to get you already quite far. Okay, so if you don't have any special requirements or needs, like most amateurs don't have, obviously, then I would say there's going to be even some money left over, and then I highly recommend that you get yourself a trinocular microscope, so one where you can attach a camera on the top, and also with a camera system, chances are pretty good that you will even have a little bit of money left over. And this microscope is going to, you're going to have it for quite a long time. And now I want to talk a little bit about the complications of buying a microscope. And I want to use an analogy. If you go to a department store and you want to buy a digital camera, and you go to the camera section, how many cameras are you going to see? You're going to see 30, 40 cameras. And now you have to make a decision and a choice on which camera to buy. And that is a little bit the problem that I would say many people who want to start with microscopy have as well. They go online, they see so many microscopes, and they don't know which microscope to choose. And it's a little bit like this. If I go to the department store and I look for a camera, I want to ask which camera do I have to choose so that I can take pictures of my holidays that I'm going to. All of the cameras will work. And the same is the case with the microscopes. All microscopes will work. And that is a little bit the thing. If all of them work, so what are the characteristics that I should look out for? Okay, you see, so the problem I would say of buying a microscope and buying a camera maybe is similar, because pretty much all of them are doing their job at this level. If you now say, well, I'm a wedding photographer and I need to take tele photos over a long distance, then of course you have already very specific requirements, and therefore you already need specific optics for the camera. But if you just want to have a general purpose camera to take holiday pictures and you have any additional specific needs or requirements, then pretty much anything will do. And I think I would say that the same is the case for microscopes, and this can make it more difficult to buy a general purpose microscope, because all of them are going to be allowed. With all of them you can see microorganisms. Okay, so, and I hope that in this video I'm going to be able to limit your choices a little bit here. So the question goes on. I did some research and I quickly found some very interesting devices, but made in China. This is, for example, the case of an Ampscope or the Swift. They to look relatively interesting and versatile, and can be ordered on Amazon. What is not easy is the lack of testing and hardware reviews. So I think there are 2 points in this comment here. First of all, made in China, and the second point is the ease of ordering and accessibility. Let me talk through it one by one. China microscopes. I know in the forums there is a lot of talk, or has been a lot of talk, about so-called China microscopes, and the word China microscope has become equivalent to a low quality microscope which does not cost a lot. I'll give you a differentiated answer here. I tell you the following, that actually pretty much all of the microscopes in the beginners, lower to medium range, pretty much all of them are made in China. The word China microscope or made in China does not mean anything anymore concerning quality. From China you can get everything. You can get honestly really bad quality. I have made a video of those as well, the link is below, to totally acceptable and fine devices. Everything is possible here, and just that it's made in China is not alone enough to determine the quality of the microscope. As a matter of fact, several years ago we bought Leica microscopes, which is a brand company for our school, because we had problems with no-name China microscopes that we ordered before. Okay, so it was these no-name China microscopes were really no-name. They didn't have any brand name on it, and they were kind of really completely discounted. And you know how schools are, not enough budget, and so we just go for those. What can go wrong? They were pretty bad. I made a video of this, but that cannot be compared now to the other China microscopes. But okay, but let me continue the story. So we said, okay, we don't want to avoid this mistake. So after 10 years after we changed the microscope, we said we need brand microscopes, and so we're going to buy Leica microscopes, okay? Real authentic Leica microscopes, and they actually had an educational line which was not quite as highly priced. So this actually might also be an option for many of you. Of the big 4 microscope manufacturing companies, some of them actually offer low-range microscopes that can be bought up to 600 euros, okay? And we've decided to buy these Leica microscopes, so we bought a whole classroom set of these Leica microscopes. Yes, I also made an unpacking video of this, link is below. And then, where were they made? Made in China. Okay, so it's kind of funny. So we deliberately did not buy China microscopes because we wanted to get quality. We bought Leica, it was also made in China, but the quality was fine, of course. Okay, you see what I mean? It doesn't make a difference anymore where it was made. Yes, Amazon is very convenient to order. Amazon has a good returns policy, to my experience. However, one of the things that Amazon does not give is it does not give, obviously, personal. You don't have anyone to talk to. Okay, so it means you have to base your choice based on the reviews alone. And I understand that, of course, there is lack of testing and hardware reviews. Who's going to test them? I mean, individual people who buy the microscopes, how would they test it? On the other hand, I think that this testing and hardware review is not really so much of an issue, and the reason is because microscopes don't have as much mechanical wear as maybe other mechanical devices. Okay, there are no fast moving parts that might wear out or so. So generally I would say if a microscope is well taken care of, then there should be no issue. Okay, generally, again, this one no-name device that we actually once had was actually a pretty bad example, and we did not buy this over Amazon, but actually over a retailer who was supplying schools. Yeah, okay, but they were kind of selling pretty much anything. Yeah? So you see, that is one of the things here, and I would say that the Amazon reviews alone are also not really always very indicative, because different people have different expectations, okay? And if some people are subjectively happy with a microscope, then you're going to give a good review without having tested it. And sometimes, how do you want to test a microscope? Do you want to take it apart, or what are the characteristics, or how long it lasts? Even not so good microscopes, if taken care of, will last a long time. So I have some certain doubts about reviews in general. But what I recommend that you do, and sometimes I do this and not only when I buy microscope parts, is when you have these 5-star ratings in Amazon, click on the, and if there are sufficient ratings, click on those ratings that have a very low number of stars, and then make a choice if this is the rating of those only 1 star or 0 stars, if this is actually because of the general microscope quality, or if this is simply because the person was not happy with this individual model. So for example, I've read reviews where people gave a bad rating because the microscope was already opened, or there was something dirty on it, or something was not aligned properly. But this was not really a general quality problem for the series, microscope series, but simply for the individual microscope. So I would say look at these 1-star ratings and figure out why it's a 1-star rating, if this is only if it's a fundamental general problem, or if it is a problem with the individual microscope that the person who bought the microscope unfortunately simply had a bad experience with. Okay, the question goes on. However, some microscopy enthusiasts have advised me to avoid low-cost Chinese brands and to focus on European brands, several of them listed here, or on high-end Chinese products like Motic, but I have noticed that European dealers often also have their microscopes made in China. Yes, this is indeed correct, even those that say that they have made the microscope in the European Union. What I found often is that even they are using optics that can be found on other Chinese-made microscopes. So what I suppose is that they might actually buy the parts from China and maybe assemble them in Europe, at least the optics as well, and basically then the microscope is still under European quality control, and some of the companies might actually use that as a way to market the microscope, that it's not a China microscope, it's that it's made in the European Union. But I have to admit one thing, then I do not really quite understand why those or some of those brands are using the same objectives that I can buy on AliExpress, for example, or that can be found on other low-cost China microscopes. So I think what happens is that there are in China several manufacturers of optics that supply the whole world, but this does not automatically mean that it's bad quality, because those optics are fine for the amateur and for the educational sector. I mean, when you have special research requirements, forget about the whole thing that I've talked about right now, because that's a completely different ball game, as you would say. Okay, so brands such as Motic are not very accessible in the part of the world where I live. Nevertheless, I managed to find a shop that sells Motic Redline. What I have, for example, also heard is that some of those companies or brands that you have, actually there's only one single company behind them, but then they're rebranding the microscopes, using different labels. So apparently, what I've if you go did Motic and Swift, for example, they have a cooperation or more or less the same company. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And Omax and Amscope, what I've heard is that they basically are different brands of the same company. So what they're doing is they're simply allocating the microscope for different price ranges simply by branding them differently. But ultimately, the quality should be similar, I would say. Now, what should you then look out for? I think that if you go online and if you visit the web page of some of those brands, it doesn't matter if they're US brands or if they're European brands, sometimes on the web page you will see that they're either selling microscopes that are more directed towards education and research and maybe small doctors' offices and so on, where they need a microscope to do routine checks. Sometimes they are targeted more towards the very introductory microscopy, and sometimes those companies, they kind of mix a little bit introductory and more advanced microscopes on the same web page. So what I want to say with that is that even the brand itself is not very indicative of whether the microscope is good or bad, but because there's only the brand name, but also what the purpose of the microscope is. Because if there's one company that's on the same web page sells from children's microscope and plastic toy microscopes even, all the way to microscopes that can be used for routine laboratory work, then it's not a question of the brand, but it's a question of the individual microscope that is being sold. So you see what I'm trying to get out here? I'm saying, I've told you two things. Forget about the label China. it's not really very meaningful. Forget about the brand itself sometimes, because that's also not meaningful, because it depends really on the specific microscope. What's left over. I get the problem. Okay, so this is a thing here, is that you probably have to focus here more a little bit on do you like the microscope. So honestly, it's kind of weird if I say it like that. Or a second advice that I have is, do you have actually someone to talk to that can give you advice and some service and some support? That might be also something to consider. So, but I move on. Other microscopy enthusiasts suggest me to stay with big ones like a Nikon, Olympus, in order to have a quality microscope that you will keep for many years. Their microscopes interest me a lot, but unfortunately far above my budget. Okay, this is again a different big topic. What I have here is an Olympus CH40 microscope, which I bought back in 1998, so over 20 years ago. Why did I buy this? Because at that time there were simply not a lot of other microscope manufacturers around, and if you want to get a quality microscope, that's what you had to go for. The market has changed in the last 20 years quite a lot. There are now many more manufacturers out there who offer a quality microscope at a low price, and those big four microscope companies, what they have done is they seem to have left a little bit the lower entry-level market, and when they've changed the system, the optical system, to infinity optics, I don't know, 20 years ago, when this happened, then I would say that those big four companies to a large extent lost the entry-level market or the amateur market. They've moved towards research a lot, and the lower market, the lower entry-level market, is now left open for all of those other companies that I've talked about, because entry-level, as you correctly say, entry-level microscopes from these four companies, they cost quite a bit of money. Possible exceptions, as I mentioned before, some of those companies, like for example in our school, the Leica company, they offered affordable introductory educational level microscopes with non-infinity optics, so basically the traditional 160 millimeter system. And this was actually something that's not very common, I have to admit, as well. So otherwise, if you want to buy an entry-level microscope, or one that is sold as an entry-level microscope by those companies, I also obtained an offer. You have to probably count approximately twice the amount that you budgeted, from 500, 600 euros, about twice of that, around 1,000 euros. That will give you a microscope that essentially is an infinity microscope, but will otherwise not offer any features that go beyond that what other low-cost and medium-cost microscopes actually offer. You also have a binocular head. You have you have objectives. Maybe the quality is a little bit higher. Maybe the images are a little bit brighter or more sharper or more contrasty. Could all be possible. The question is whether this comparatively small improvement in image quality actually is worth it, that you invest so much more money. You can do amateur microscopy also with relatively good simple devices. The issues are totally different when you have specific needs, like for example DIC contrast. That's, for example, it's something that I am currently working towards and saving for. Is a microscope with DIC contrast, which is only offered by those for large manufacturers, because this is a specific imaging technique which allows you to see transparent specimens and gives a very attractive and beautiful image, and which can be also used for publications quite well, and so on. But that are completely different features, okay? But if you just want to stay with a regular bright field, we want to do routine microscopy and don't have any specific requirements, then I would say stay with the entry-level microscopes, because and that's another important point, because they are relatively low cost, and then you can save the money later on for a microscope where you already know if you want to have something specific. So if you decide after a couple of years, okay, I want to go into phase contrast after all, or to do something special, or then you can always go back to those big companies, and then you already know a little bit more of what you want, and then they're able to basically provide you with an appropriate device But the cost of those microscopes generally is so much higher that whether you've spent now 300 or 400 euros at the beginning is not going to make a huge difference, because with those high-end microscopes, with those high-end objectives, so one objective alone can cost around 2,000 euros, okay? Just the objective, forget about the rest of the microscope. So it's so far away from that what beginners or entry-level microscopists want, that I would only recommend those high-end devices if you actually need features, and there are some microscopists who need that and who want to have that. That's if you're in research, for example, of other specific needs, then it's of course a different, entirely different issue, and then you have to go for this anyway. So now another thing is last page, and we now move on to used microscopes. I was then told that there is a way to buy these second-hand microscopes at a very interesting price from some dealers, and I find this interesting, but I'm afraid of buying a damaged device and having trouble finding spare parts. Buying second-hand microscopes is indeed an option if you buy it over a dealer. So exactly the thing that you worry about, that then these microscopes are going to be damaged. If you buy them from a dealer, I probably would say that the risk is less, because those dealers will hopefully have refurbished the microscope, will make sure that it's operating properly and that it will work and that you're going to be satisfied. I think it might be a problem to buy second-hand microscopes if you simply go on eBay and buy it from anyone. Also maybe from directly from hospitals or universities who want to exchange the system. Those microscopes might be well taken care of. You don't know it, however, because they might not do a quality check, or they might be fitted with accessories and optics that you don't need but which drive up the price. Okay, so this could be indeed a problem of buying it directly from an organization. But if you go over a dealer who are specialized on selling microscopes and who make sure that the microscope is working, provided that they do that, then I would say it's not an issue. About spare parts, that's a long story. Spare parts generally, if you buy, I give you two examples here. If you buy yourself a microscope of, let's say, the Zeiss standard microscope, or the Olympus BH2 series, or CHA series, or CH2 series, these are microscopes that were around in the 1980s and 1990s, and those microscopes, there is a fairly decent market of them available also on eBay. So that means theoretically, if you want to, you can put your own microscope together, and those brand microscopes of the old pre-infinity system there are still reasonably many parts around, but this does not automatically mean that this is going to be a lot cheaper, because also those microscopes have a research background, and if a university now, for example, has is using BH2 microscopes and they're happy with them and they need spare parts, you're going to go on the second-hand market, and this is going to drive up the price. I'll give you a very specific example using my microscope here. There is an intermediate optic, simply to show you about the cost. It's an intermediate optic in here that I have. Got this. This is a projection eyepiece, and this projection eyepiece is needed to make an image on the camera here. However, there's a second type of projection eyepiece that can be found in the second-hand market, which is actually made for small sensor cameras like I have here. But the problem is that those special projection eyepieces for the small sensor cameras are so expensive. One eyepiece costs 1,000 euros, 600 to 1,000 euros. Just because it is so rare, because people who really need it, because they already have a system, a range of microscopes in use, and they need that, then they're willing to pay that amount of money. So this means that even the second-hand market does not automatically mean that it's going to be any much cheaper. So you see what I'm saying here? It's a little bit differentiated. Generally on the second-hand market, what you will not find as much is you will not find as many modern Chinese entry-level microscopes. It's simply not worth it. If you buy yourself a microscope for 350 euros, and after a couple of years you want to sell it, for how much would you want to sell it? 100 euros, 200 euros? Is it worth selling it for that amount? You see, there is not, to my experience, not a huge market for those. But for those brand name microscopes, there is indeed, they have a resale value, and this actually might speak also for getting a microscope of the big four companies, because the resale value is much higher. So that is essentially where the value is. Okay, so this is the thing. In summary, Second-hand is a possibility, but I would only advise it if you get it from a second-hand dealer. And I also would disadvise a little bit, I'm going to be careful right now, sometimes there are also infinity microscopes available from not such big companies like the 4 big ones, but there are some other companies that also offer quality infinity devices, but because these companies are smaller, you might again have a problem of finding spare parts. But if you want to find spare parts and if you want to have a long-term service or maintenance, or then you gotta go probably with second-hand microscopes from one of the big 4 companies. So in conclusion, I'm back where I started and I still don't know what would be the best. Do you think it would be better for me to buy a Chinese new model or second-hand top of the range line model instead? From your experience, do you know a manufacturer that stands out from the crowd and could be recommended? A little bit as a summary, apparently it's very apparent it is a controversial topic. Brand name, even used brand name versus low-cost Chinese-made microscope, even if it is from a low-cost brand, what's better? Always when there is some kind of a controversy like this, I would say it is probably to a certain extent a question of taste. Otherwise it wouldn't be a controversy. I generally would suggest that you think a little bit and ask yourself, am I more or less a person that is more interested in the technology of the microscope? So this means, do I want to learn more about putting together a microscope? Then I would say, okay, you can even go as far as spending some time putting together your own microscope and learning on the process this way, the microscopy this way. If you say, okay, I'm actually more interested in observing nature, in taking pictures, in applying and using the microscope, then you might probably be better off with a microscope that works out of the box and that you can start to use right away. I generally probably advise that you do not spend too much money at the beginning until you know a little bit more, and that you can make a wiser choice than later on of what you actually want. But yeah, and with your price range, I recommend that you probably get yourself a microscope with a trinocular head and that you have also imaging possibilities. So before I stop, I just want to mention another thing. Something that has not been discussed or talked about a lot. So you see this here. This is always overlooked. Some microscopes have an internal transformer. Many of the microscopes these days are LEDs, and some have an external power adapter. What should you go for? Again, to a certain extent a question of taste. Many microscopes, irrespective of this, also have batteries, rechargeable batteries. Those batteries are there for portability and also for classroom reuse. That's because not all classrooms have a power supply. But one of the things that you should be aware is, and that is again something that you might have, that's your choice, it really doesn't matter a great deal, but this thing is more stable. So for example, for a school setting or when you're moving around the microscope a lot, then we found these to be more stable because these things here they are a little bit more flimsy and they tend to break more easily. Just saying. So that is one of the things that you might also look for. And I think for that should be enough for today. Long video. Yeah, leave your comments behind. I'm of course always interested in also hearing your opinions. And I wish you all the best. Happy microbe hunting as always, and see you around next time.